Love is not always lost through dramatic arguments or slammed doors. Often it fades without a sound. It leaves quietly without warning, and before you realize it, something has changed. You look at the same face, hear the same voice, but the warmth is missing. The connection that once felt effortless now feels forced, and you cannot quite explain why. People do not usually say they no longer love you. They just stop showing it. Not because they want to hurt you, but because feelings change. Attention shifts. Hearts move on, not always with anger, but with indifference. And that is harder to face. Have you ever felt completely alone, even while standing next to someone you love deeply? Like you are physically present but emotionally invisible? There is no fight. There is no goodbye. Just silence. And a growing space between what was and what is. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When someone begins to withdraw, our suffering often comes not from their distance, but from our resistance to it. We hold on to how things used to be, while reality drifts further from our grasp. Today we explore a quiet truth. That when love begins to leave, it always shows itself in two ways. Not loud, not cruel, but clear, if you are willing to see it. Now let me take you into a quiet village where one man faced the greatest fear of anyone in love. He learned not through arguments, not through betrayal, but through silence and emptiness that taught him more clearly than words ever could. It is in this story that we will find the two first signs that someone no longer loves you. The farmer and the falling leaves. In a quiet village surrounded by tall hills and wide open fields, there lived a humble farmer named Elias. He was a man of simple pleasures. He rose with the sun, worked the land with care, and returned home each evening to the one person who made all his labor feel worthwhile. Her name was Liana, his wife, his love, his home. Their life was not perfect, but it was theirs. Shared glances over dinner, quiet laughter in the garden, soft whispers before sleep. Years passed, and though time aged their faces, Elias believed their hearts remained the same. Until one autumn, something changed. It was not a single moment. No argument. No betrayal, just a subtle quiet, a colder gaze, a shorter response. He began to notice that Liana no longer waited for him by the door. Meals were prepared but left on the table without a word. She no longer asked about his day, nor did she share much about hers. At first, Elias thought she was tired. The season was changing after all. Maybe it was just a passing mood. But as the weeks went on, the distance grew. Her eyes wandered elsewhere, and her mind seemed occupied by thoughts she no longer shared. He tried to bring back the warmth. He brought home her favorite bread from the town market. He tended the garden with extra care. He even read aloud the poem she once loved. But her smiles were no longer real. They were polite, distant, as if she was watching a stranger act out the role of a husband she no longer recognized. Elias felt lost. He spoke to no one about it. Not the neighbors. Not his brother in the nearby village. Instead, he packed a small bag one morning and walked toward the forest. It was said that deep beyond the woods, in a clearing where the sun never fully reached, there lived an old man known only as the Watcher. The Watcher was not a sage by title, nor a priest by duty. He was a man who had once loved, once lost, and chose to live alone where the world moved slowly. Those who visited him came not for answers, but for perspective. Elias found the Watcher sitting on a wooden bench outside a small cottage, watching leaves fall from the trees. The man said nothing at first, only motioned for Elias to sit beside him. For a long while they sat in silence, eyes following the slow dance of autumn leaves spiraling to the ground. Finally, Elias spoke. "I think she no longer loves me, but I cannot prove it. She is still there. But it feels like I am alone." The Watcher nodded slowly. When the wind changes, the leaves fall. They do not ask permission. They do not explain themselves. They simply know the season has ended. Elias looked down. "So what do I do? How can I know for certain?" The Watcher picked up a brittle leaf from the bench and held it up. Love does not leave with loud footsteps. It leaves in silence. It fades like the green of a leaf. First the edges, then the color, and finally it breaks away. There are always signs, but they are not shouted. They are whispered. He stood and walked toward a tall tree at the edge of the clearing. This tree has stood here for longer than I have been alive. Each year it lets go of what no longer serves it, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with wisdom. Elias followed him, eyes on the branches swaying above. You want to know if love has left you? Then listen. Do not force her to speak. Do not demand clarity from someone who is unsure of their own heart. Just watch. The signs will come. And when they do, the watcher turned and placed the leaf in Elias's palm. You will not need to ask. You will already know. In that quiet clearing, surrounded by trees shedding what they no longer needed, Elias understood something he had never wanted to believe. That love, like all things in nature, has its seasons. And when someone begins to fall away from you, the world will not scream. It will whisper, through silence, through small absences, through cold mornings that once were warm. What remains is not the fight to keep love, but the strength to witness its change. And in the falling of those first leaves, two signs always appear. Always. First sign, they no longer share their inner world with you. The days after Elias returned to the village were quiet. Liana was there, as she had always been. She cooked. She cleaned. She asked about the crops. But something essential had gone missing. And now that Elias had been taught to listen, he could hear it clearly. It was the silence between the words. The lack of depth. The conversations that used to meander through thoughts and dreams were now short and efficient. Functional. Safe. She spoke like someone who had something to hide, not in secrecy but in absence. She simply stopped letting him in. Elias remembered when they used to sit by the fire and speak for hours. About their fears. About hopes. About meaningless little things that somehow made them feel closer. Now she answered questions with a nod. She told him what he needed to know, and nothing more. It was not hostility. It was retreat. One evening, Elias tried to bring back what once was. He asked her what had made her smile that day. She looked confused, then replied that nothing in particular had. The moment passed. The room felt colder. It was like knocking on a door that used to be open and finding it locked with no explanation. When someone stops sharing their inner world with you, it is not always because they have something to hide. Often, it is because they no longer feel the need to bring you into their thoughts. The connection that once flowed both ways becomes one-sided. You keep reaching in, but nothing comes back. It is not loud. It is not cruel. But it is unmistakable. The watcher had spoken of this. He called it the closing of the gate. He told Elias that every person carries a garden inside them, a place of memories, emotions, and dreams. To love someone is to be invited into that garden, to walk its paths, to care for its beauty. And when that person begins to withdraw love, the first thing they do is close the gate. Not with anger, not with final words, but slowly, silently. The gate closes when they stop telling you about their day, when they leave out details they once rushed to share, when they no longer ask your opinion, not because they are hiding something, but because your thoughts no longer feel essential to their own. Elias saw it now. He saw that she had retreated behind walls that used to be transparent. She still smiled at him, still offered him tea, but her thoughts were somewhere else. Her joys and frustrations, her small discoveries and private sorrows were no longer brought to him. And that, more than anything, told him what he needed to know. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But what happens when there is nothing left to hear? What happens when the person you love no longer gives you anything to listen to? The answer is difficult but simple. You accept it. In Stoic thought, suffering comes not from the event, but from our judgment of it. When someone stops sharing with you, the pain does not come from the silence itself. It comes from your expectation that they should speak, that they must continue to let you in. The truth is, we cannot own another person's inner world. We are guests there always. And when the invitation is withdrawn, the wise thing to do is not to break down the door. It is to bow and walk away with dignity. Elias began to speak less, not out of spite, but out of understanding. He no longer asked questions that would be answered with indifference. He no longer tried to stir warmth where there was only routine. Instead, he observed. And in that observation, he saw the truth not in what was said, but in what was no longer spoken. This is the first sign. When love begins to fade, the voice of the heart grows quiet. They no longer share their fears, their hopes, their soul. You are still in their life, but no longer in their thoughts. And once you are no longer in someone's inner world, their outer actions will soon follow. The first leaf has fallen. The garden gate is closed. Second sign, they start comparing you silently. It was late afternoon when Elias noticed it again. They were walking through the village market, as they often did in the past. The rhythm of their steps used to match. They used to stop at the same stalls, laugh at the same odd fruits, and choose spices together. But today, her eyes wandered. Not to the stalls, not to the food, but to other people. He watched as her gaze lingered on a young couple laughing near the baker's shop. Her expression did not change. There was no envy, no sadness, just a quiet observation. She looked at them the way one looks at something once familiar but now distant. Later that evening, she complimented the dress of another woman at the well. Not out loud, just a passing comment. Simple, almost careless. But something in her tone made Elias feel like he had just been measured against someone else and found lacking. She did not say a single hurtful word. Yet every glance away from him, every silent admiration of others, cut deeper than any criticism ever could. When someone begins to fall out of love, they often start to compare, not openly, not cruelly, but quietly. They begin to notice what others have that you do not. They begin to admire traits in strangers that they once found in you. They may not realize they are doing it, but you feel it. The laughter you once shared becomes muted. Your habits once seen as endearing now seem irritating. Your presence becomes less of a comfort and more of a comparison point. The watcher had spoken of this too. He told Elias the story of a man who once carved a statue of his wife. He shaped it from memory, believing it captured her beauty perfectly. But over time, he began to add features that did not belong to her. A more elegant smile, a straighter posture, softer eyes. He claimed it was still her. But the truth was, it had become someone else, an ideal she could never be. This is what comparison does. It replaces real connection with imagined perfection. It shifts attention from what is shared to what is missing, from gratitude to desire. And it always begins quietly. You will notice it in how they speak about others, in the way their eyes light up at someone else's story, but grow dim when you speak, in the subtle distance they create when they begin to see you not as their choice, but as their habit. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be content to seem what you really are." But when someone is no longer content with who you are, their restlessness reveals itself in comparison. Not in arguments, not in complaints, but in glances, in sighs, in silence. Elias began to sense it in every room they entered together. He noticed how Liana no longer reached for his hand in public, how she smiled more often at others than at him, how she admired things he could never give her without ever saying it out loud. There is a pain in being measured without being told. It is the ache of being seen, but not cherished, of being near someone who is already imagining someone else. The Stoics teach us not to chase what is outside our control. We cannot stop someone from comparing us to others, but we can choose not to compare ourselves in return. We can choose to accept that love built on comparison is not love, but performance, and we are not actors. When someone silently compares you, they stop seeing you as enough. They look for qualities you do not possess and forget the ones you do. This is the second sign. The heart has shifted. It now looks outward instead of inward. Elias did not confront Liana. He did not beg her to see him differently. He simply watched, and what he saw was a woman still present in body, but already walking away in spirit. Love begins with admiration, but it fades when that admiration is redirected. And the most painful part is not being replaced. It is being slowly forgotten while still standing in front of the person you love. That is how the second leaf falls, not with a word, not with a decision, but with a gaze that no longer sees you. What should you do when you see the signal? After many days of watching and waiting, Elias returned once more to the forest. He found the watcher sitting at the same bench, eyes turned toward the same trees, still losing their leaves. Elias sat beside him, the weight of silence hanging heavily on his shoulders. "I have seen the signs," he said. "She does not share herself with me anymore. And I feel her comparing me to things I cannot become. So what should I do now?" The watcher did not answer right away. Instead, he bent down and picked up a handful of fallen leaves. He let them fall one by one from his hand, watching how they drifted on the breeze without resistance. "You cannot chase the wind," he said quietly. "And you cannot force a leaf to cling to a branch that no longer feeds it." Elias lowered his head. "Should I fight for her? Should I ask her to stay?" The watcher shook his head gently. "You can ask. You can cry. You can explain every ache in your chest. But if her heart has already walked away, your words will not reach her. You would not be speaking to her. You would be speaking to the memory of who she was. That is the pain of love. Not that it ends, but that we keep trying to hold on to what has already gone." The Stoic teachings remind us that true strength comes from accepting reality, not resisting it. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and it is achieved by letting go of what is outside our control." You cannot control how someone feels. You cannot force love to return. You cannot make someone stay if their spirit has already left. But you can control something far more powerful, yourself. Elias sat still, eyes on the forest floor. "And how do I do that?" By not begging for attention, by not lowering your worth to chase something that no longer sees it, by standing where you are and choosing peace over pride. When someone begins to leave, do not chase them into the darkness. Let them walk. And if they return, let it be by choice, not guilt. If they do not, then you will still be standing, whole, undiminished. The greatest mistake we make is thinking that letting go means we did not care. But the opposite is true. Letting go means we cared enough not to trap what wanted to fly. It means we loved enough to honor truth over fantasy. So Elias asked, "What should I do tomorrow?" And the watcher answered, "You rise, you water your field, you greet the sun, you care for your life, because it is still yours, even if someone has stepped out of it." Let them go, Elias, but do more than just let go. Choose yourself, choose to live fully, choose to build a future that does not depend on someone else's heart. Because the one thing you must never lose is your own soul in the effort to keep someone else's love. That is what Stoic strength looks like. Not coldness, not distance, but courage. The courage to stay grounded when everything around you is drifting away. The courage to keep walking even when the path beside you is empty. The strength in walking alone. Elias did not return home with anger. He did not demand answers. He did not break the silence with accusations. He simply began to live differently. He still rose early. He still worked his fields. But there was a new stillness in him, a calm that came not from certainty but from release. He no longer waited for her to return to him with warmth. He no longer searched her face for signs of the love he once knew. He accepted what was. And in that acceptance, something shifted. One morning he stood at the edge of his land, looking over the rows of crops. The season was changing again. The air was colder, the trees barer, and yet the land was still alive. So was he. He looked into the distance and saw his own reflection in the window of their home, not as a man who had been left behind, but as a man who had chosen not to lose himself. Love does not always end. Sometimes it changes form. Sometimes it becomes a memory. Sometimes it becomes a lesson. But it always leaves us different. The Stoics taught that we do not own anything in this life. Not possessions, not people, not even the feelings we hope will last forever. What we have is the moment, the ability to respond with reason, the strength to let go with grace. Elias learned that letting go was not weakness. It was the highest form of strength. It was trust in life, trust in himself, trust that whatever left him did not define him. And in that quiet, he found something greater than closure. He found peace. He walked away, not in sorrow, not in defeat, but in truth. Now I ask you, have you ever seen these signs in your own relationships? Have you felt the quiet withdrawal of someone who once invited you into their inner world? Have you sensed the silent comparisons that told you your love was no longer enough? If you have, you are not alone. We have all stood in that quiet place, wondering if we should fight or surrender, wondering if letting go makes us weak or wise. So I invite you to share your story. Take a moment now. Reflect deeply and write down your experience. By sharing, you not only heal yourself but help others find their own strength to move forward. Tell us how you found the courage to let go, or perhaps how you struggle to hold on. Because wisdom is not simply hearing words. It is living them. It is sharing what we have learned so others may walk their path with strength and clarity. Remember, love is never owned. It is lived. And sometimes it is honored most deeply by letting go.